3D Lesson 10, Rotoscope Assets. So we've got a laptop, we've got this background here, and then another background here. Okay, but we can use either one of these actually. This one looks a little bit more official, let's just say. And again, you can swap these out for FBI, CIA, whatever, KGB. But the main thing here is we're going to use this laptop file. We're going to rotoscope. And all rotoscoping is it's a way of, like green screening, it's a way to knock the background, drop the background out. And in this case, the idea here is we want to replace that boring screen with something a little bit more interesting. So we have to rotoscope the fingers here and drop the background out behind it, right? So that's basically what we're going to do. All right, any questions so far? So let me show you what I did previously, so we can get an idea here. What's going on. And I did a little extra couple things just to make it look more realistic. And then we'll kind of take it from the top. We'll take it from scratch here. For some reason, the laptop movie, let me just double check here, replace page. So as you can see, there's the NSA login screen that has been replaced from the background. So a couple of things here. If you watch the laptop movie, you're going to see that it does indeed kind of move around a little bit, right? Now, you might say, well, why don't we just stabilize it so it can't do that, right? But in this case, you don't really want to stabilize it because then you're going to end up with a big gap in the background and stuff like that. So it's a camera move. Maybe, whether it's inadvertent or not, it's got to stay. So what we need to do is we need to track that and apply the track to any other objects we have here. Okay, so also you notice that when the person starts logging in, you kind of see these little bubbles here. So I just added that as a little extra thing to make it look like they're trying to log in. So you could have it at the end turn red or something like that using some effects, right? Here's the NSA login screen. So if I turn that off, you can see there's the old screen behind it. And so that obviously makes it a little bit more interesting, maybe amps up the suspense or whatever. And you can see that I have my track here. Here's my motion tracker, tracker 1, right? So again, if I was to come into the tracker, right, we should be able to see that. Let's see here. Right, and from that tracker, it's going to kind of show us what it did here. So it kind of moves this around. We're going to track that, and we're going to like basically the target should be the NSA screen, or if you want to use the other one, it doesn't really matter. Right now, the idea is just to get some practice in and understand how this works. Okay, and then we got the credentials here. You can see this is just simply a text field that's been turned into a 3D layer, so it appears a little bit more oblique on the screen. And of course, it goes behind the fingers here. As you can see, the fingers have been cut out using the Rotoscope tools. All right, so we have that aspect. And basically, that's it. Okay. So let's try to do this on our own here. And I'll probably use the other background that they provided. It's a little bit more animated. here, but she's not here, huh? All right, so let's see if we can set this up. Now the rotoscope, luckily we're on the third iteration, so we have rotor brush 3, and each one has gotten better and better at determining or finding the background, but we have to go frame by frame and we have to kind of tell it, right, whether or not it's on the right track, right? So we're going to define the foreground, and also sometimes you have to define the background, and then you go frame by frame through and you just make sure that it's following along. And of course, just like with the green screen, we want to kind of fine tune the edges here. So let me just turn off these backgrounds so we can kind of get an idea here of what's going on. So obviously, we've got 2 versions of the laptop here, right? The one on top is, actually the one behind is going to be giving us the rest of the background, so we don't want to lose that. But the one in the foreground, right, even though when we turn it off we don't see any difference, that's actually what's been cut out. So if we click on that and we click on the, let's say the alpha channel here, we can see indeed that the fingers have been kind of separated from the rest, okay? And in this case, we don't need to worry about the whole frame, the whole movie size. We just want to concentrate just where the fingers are and where they overlap this screen right here, okay? And again, with all these exercises, you can extrapolate out and say, well, gee, what if I wanted to use this same technique on someone that's walking through a background? Or what if I want to use this on some other kind of motion or whatever? Doesn't really matter. The process is going to be the same. All right, so let's just set this up for our own. We'll do a little practice, and then we'll kind of wrap this up on Wednesday, and hopefully everyone understands the process here. Okay, so I'm just going to start from scratch. Obviously, go ahead and download your assets here. So you can either right click, or again, I think I have a laptop where preview is available. Okay, so we'll download that. And then let's, this one. Maybe I'll do the NSA then. Maybe I didn't prepare that one. Anyway, let's take a look here what we have. Let's see.
Just initials for laptop.
Alright, there's laptop, there's the login screen. We'll use these 2 to start off with today. And we'll keep it simple just by making a brand new composition. So come in here. Okay, we'll make the laptop the composition size. We'll come in here, bring our screen in. Right, again, you can bring either screen you want. this one, you're not really gonna see it under the window or anything like that, right? We're gonna go right into the toolbar here. And this pretty much completes everything in the toolbar. Last week we went paintbrush, clone stamp, eraser, so this is the last one here. And again, if you wanna use the puppet pen, that's something you can kinda do on your own. And here's the Roto brush tool. If we click and hold that, we have the brush tool, refine edge tool. With the new versions, we don't really need the refined edge tool as much. Okay, so what we need to do here is to think about what it is we need to knock out of the background here. Right? So we'll concentrate on that. Let me make a little bit more room here. And again, it's just the fingers here that are over that background. So you don't always have to start at the beginning. It's not like the tracker where you could track forward or you have to track backwards. You can actually kind of start in the middle and work forwards and backwards going through. So pick any frame you want. Basically, double click. Remember, we need to use the rotor brush a lot of times in the
Wait,
layer window.
went a little faster for, you said double click or something?
Excuse me?
You went a little faster,
Go ahead.
you said double click on something,
Yeah, I just double click the laptop and you're gonna
Oh.
get the layer window. Just like normal, anytime you double click, you'll get that layer window. And this is where you're gonna see the magic happen in a sense. So we have to be mindful of that. And once I have the rotor brush chosen, you can see I have this little kind of green plus right here. Okay? So once we kind of define the foreground versus the background, and by the way, if you hold the control key, you can make your brush bigger or smaller, right? And the green basically tells you that I want to work on the foreground, right? So I can go through here and as you can see here, I'm defining the foreground and I can hold shift here and say, well, these fingers are part of it, right? But if I hold Alt, I can say, well, this is obviously not part of it. The keyboard's not part of it. So sometimes it's a little bit of a trade-off here. I can see once I've defined that area, it gives me this little kind of green check box right here, right? Rotor brush and refined edge span, range and direction of automatic propagation, right? Now if we use the number 1 key, right? It's trying to basically propagate backwards. Okay, and right now I don't have a really good thing defined, so I'm going to go back and do this again, but notice that where I made my mark, my brush, there's a special frame there. It's got the kind of black diamond in it, and then as I propagate forward and back, right, I want to continue to correct these strokes and make sure that rotor brush understands what I'm talking about here, okay? So let me just hit delete, let's start over again. And again, I'm just gonna define, that's the foreground, Alt. This is the background here, so we gotta tell it no, right? And it can be a little bit frustrating at first. Generally, you don't wanna do undo on this. You just wanna kinda tell it, again, using Alt. Hey, this is not the background, right? So remember, control makes your brush bigger or smaller, and so you might have to make it a little bit smaller and say, hey, that's the background right there, right? That's the background, okay? Green is the foreground, right? So we'll kind of continue with that. So let's start off with a really good first, let's say, frame here. Right? Alt, that's not foreground, that's the background. Again, you can use your space bar to kind of go through. Right? So that's not a bad first frame right here. Again, we can always refine it further if we want. Right, something to that effect. maybe, I wanna make sure we get the whole wrist there, and again, I just, there, something like that. Okay, obviously when holes like this open up, you wanna be mindful of that, but that's not really affecting much right now because the screen is back here, right? So let's just see what that does, right? So again, if I hit the number 2, I go forward 1 frame. You gotta keep an eye on to make sure that it's finding that edge, right? Okay, and just, I'm going through, it sees a little hole there, it closes it up. Notice it's doing a nice job here on the fingers, the details there. Okay, and I'm just kind of propagating forward, right? Now, by the same token, I can go back and I can hit the number 1 key and propagate backwards as well. And again, you're going to use any corrective measures, strokes that you need to tell rotor brush, hey, this is supposed to be foreground, hey, this is supposed to be background, right? You can see we have a little section here on the left side in the composition window. You can actually see that it's dropped out the background, right? And that's exactly what we want to do. So you can imagine kind of a composite sandwich, right? Where we're going to have the hands are going to be in the very front on the top layer. And then behind them, we're going to have our new screen, right? And then behind that, we'll have the rest of the background as it appears there, right? So let me just kind of read through here so that I'm trying to explain things in a way, right? Now probably about 2 weeks ago, we did this with the tulips, right? And we tried to take the butterfly and make him basically fly through the tulips. That one's a super easy example. So we need to just kind of get a little bit more detailed here with this, right? So base frame, right? That's the one I started off with here. That's the one with the black diamond in it, right? I'm going to propagate forward and or backwards, right? And make sure, again, that I apply any corrective strokes to any frame. So you want to be mindful that you are going through frame by frame, okay? And you want to fill that up with green, right? Now there's cases here, maybe we can't see the whole thing. And then a lot of times, like right here, like there doesn't need to be any kind of edge of demarcation. So in this case, I could just kind of go through and say, hey, that's all the same. But in that case, look what it did, right? So there's trade-offs you can make and stuff like that. But we really want to use this for the entirety of this. So I'm going to go ahead and back it all the way to the beginning and hope that it follows. And you can see now why I want to start in the middle. Like maybe I don't want to start at the beginning, right? When he has both hands resting on the keyboard, maybe that's not a good place to start, but we can start in the middle where there's kind of some action and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of going through, making sure, and again, rotor brush 3, working pretty well. And again, the minute you initiate the rotor brush, you're going to get this effects. Okay, make sure you're working on version 3, because that's the most sophisticated one, right? And we'll just kind of go back through. All right, it's trying to catch up to me here. Okay, I don't want to crash this thing, which is easy enough to do, okay? So we've got all that propagated out. Everything looks pretty good here. Okay, and then once we get to the end now, number 2, frame by frame. Okay, any questions? So 1 goes backwards, 2 goes forwards, right? Okay, sometimes it has to render, so you got to give it time, right? Because it's trying to figure out where is the beginning and end of this, right? You can also sometimes too use the edges, like let's say if you have a clip and you don't need to do this on the whole thing, right? You can also kind of trim your clip using these kind of sidebars here. In this case, we are going to use the whole one. So I'm just going to continue to propagate forward, and I'm going to watch to make sure there's no mistakes happening. Now you got to also be mindful, if we're going to substitute this background image, right, for one or another, you know, I don't want to have the hands just cut off here at the wrist. So you want to make sure you extend the image out, or the line, let's say, of demarcation out a little bit, because even if we did something with the fingers here, if we had another image that goes behind, we wouldn't want to see that through the background, right? So be mindful of that. Okay, so here's a little bit of the workflow. Identify the foreground you wish to separate from its background. Choose a representative base frame where the maximum amount of the foreground is visible, right? So I started in the middle. Define the base frame using a collection of foreground and background roto brush strokes, right? So remember, green is foreground, holding Alt turns it red to a negative, and then there you can define the background here, right? Move a few frames away from the base and tweak the propagation parameters to optimize rotor brush tracking of a shot. These are some of the parameters. A lot of times you don't have to mess with any of these, right? But you could go in there and you could say, you know, search radius, you could change that, things like that. Again, we don't want to do this on the fly, because then we're going to wipe out everything we did here. Notice too, as it's waiting, it's also propagating forward automatically, right? Okay, so here's some of the parameters. You can turn on something like view search region. You can see here's the algorithm that's kind of using, right, and what it's looking at here. So we can turn that off. Enable classic controls, right? We'll leave that off for now. So yeah, some of these things are in the propagation settings here. I'll mess with some of these once we're done, the feather, the contrast, and all that kind of stuff. But right now, let's just see what's happening. And look, it's trying to propagate forward everything. Okay. Okay, so move a few frames away from the base and tweak the propagation parameters. Return to the base frame, then step away from it one frame at a time, adding foreground and background strokes as needed. Tweak the matte parameter to refine the resulting alpha channel, right? And this is the matte parameter right here, rotor brush matte, right? A little bit like the green screening we did earlier. Okay, so an optimal base frame is where the foreground is most clearly revealed. Rotor brush finds it easier to propagate its segmentation boundary when details disappear. For example, when gaps between individual figures close, compared with the sudden appearance of new details, such as separated fingers. So again, a good base frame was where the fingers are together, and then they slowly start to separate. And then rotor brush can kind of track that and follow that. You may create multiple base frames during the course of a shot, right? So you don't have to just have one. You can go in there and you can look at the most, let's say, difficult frames of the shot, and you can say, hey, I want to make sure I tell rotor brush exactly what's going on here in terms of foreground and background. In this case, where there are multiple instances, when the gaps between the fingers open, then close again, we'll pick one instance to work on for now. In other words, frame 104 is a good candidate, as there's a gap between the index and middle finger of the left hand, and we can still see most of the little finger on the right hand, right? All right? So our focus is to create a good alpha channel for the hands and right sleeve as they actually move in front of the screen. Since we're going to grab part of the sleeve, we need to go ahead and select the entire shirt as our foreground element. Otherwise, the resulting matte edge may cause visual artifacts right? If just part of the shirt is grafted back on top of the original shot. Fortunately, we don't need to be as critical in cutting out the rest of the shirt as we have been with the hands, right? So basically, that's it in a nutshell here. And again, you can turn on different things here. I just want to make sure I'm not skipping over anything, but yeah, that's basically the process here. Okay. Don't worry about making too many rotor brush strokes. More information helps rotor brush perform more accurate calculations. It just doesn't ever keep an incorrect stroke that crosses over between foreground and background. Undo if you make a mistake. If you don't undo, the incorrect stroke will pollute the information pool rotor brush is working from, potentially causing trouble. If rotor brush keeps misinterpreting a correct stroke, give the rotor brush more information by adding additional small strokes, right? All corrections are propagated from the base frame outward along the rotor brush span, therefore it's important to catch and correct errors as close to the base frame as possible to reduce the number of corrections you'll have to perform later or earlier, okay? When you make small corrective strokes into areas with sharp angles, such as between these fingers, you may be disappointed to see the segmentation boundary did not outline the space you thought you defined. Part of the reason is this boundary is displaying the approximate center line for what later may be softly defined semi-transparent area. Another is that smoothing for the boundary may be set too high. So you can lower your smoothing a little bit under the mat, right here. Okay. And again, we don't have refined edge set here, so that's all grayed out. Okay. So basically, it's done everything to the end here. I'll go back. Maybe I'll go back to the beginning here. I'm just going to hit the number 1 right here. Notice there's my base frame right here. You can see all these aspects. It's a lot like the paintbrush. It's got strokes here, all these different strokes. You can see them kind of setting up right here. If you want, you can kind of come in the middle here and just make sure. Okay, this is the foreground. Notice that it's propagating back. This is the background. Right? This is the foreground. Something to that effect. Right? And we'll just propagate back, make sure, we'll double check. Hey, it's fairly straightforward. Now we got an issue here. Does that really make a difference? Not really, but let's, just in case, good practices, make that. It just sees that little bit of lighter splash of color right there. Right, looks pretty good. Notice how it's opening up some of those boundaries there. And it's, if you have the right file, it's almost automatic here. Okay? So there we go. We got the whole thing defined. It's all in green, right? Which means we've gone through every frame. We've looked at it. We've offered corrective strokes if needed. You can see here, there's some of these here. So then once you're done, what you're going to want to do is just freeze it. Okay? So I'm going to freeze that because I'm happy with the way it came out. And of course, a lot of this is very time consuming. So you want to take your time, do it right the first time. Once we freeze it, we've locked it in. Okay? Now obviously for demonstration purposes, I haven't seen every frame here. It automatically did some of these. So if we find any problems, we'll have to redo it later. Okay, so it says rotobrush and refined edge propagation is frozen, unfreeze to update. So if I do need to make changes or anything, I would have to unfreeze that, okay? All right, so let's concentrate now on the rest of it here. We're gonna make this composite happen. So we'll go back. Let's close our effects for now. Go back to the project window. And we'll bring in our, let's see, here's our login right here. Okay, now, if I bring this in, right, before I do that, let's just turn off the visibility of it. We're gonna need another instance of the laptop, right? So whether you wanna use the one you have already, duplicate it, delete the effects, or you wanna bring another instance of it in, doesn't really matter. There it is there, right? And then somewhere in between, as I said, we're gonna wanna make a sandwich here, right? Kind of sandwich that in. Okay, so we'll put this one on top. Add something to that effect. Obviously, this is gonna be a little bit large, so we'll kind of scale it down here. Okay, and as you can see here, as long as this doesn't look too strange here, which we can fix in a little bit, we can kind of get that set up. Now there's a little bit of motion here, so we'll have to check that, see if we can track that. Do we need to do that before we do the roto or after? So sometimes you can just be intuitive about it. And then what about this laptop? We can't just set it right here. That doesn't look right. This new splash screen, right? So one of the things we can do with that is a thing called corner pin. So if we go into our effects and presets window here, right? If I type in corner pin, we get this nice. Okay, let's make sure we're on the right layer here. This nice attribute. And with that, notice it's upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. Well, it's pretty intuitive. So if I click on upper right, upper left, it's going to put that right where it needs to be. Upper right, we'll put that here as well. Lower left, it's a little bit hard to see where that is. Lower right, put that here. Okay, and then this one we can just kind of eyeball where we think it might need to be. And you can zoom in here and kind of get an idea of where that would live. And again, we want that to look realistic, right? If you see a large jump between the light and the dark here, you can also obviously blur your edges and stuff like that if you want to kind of fit in a little bit. Okay, just zooming in here. Yeah, that one looks pretty good. So once you set these up, you can kind of move them around a little bit. Okay, so that's pretty good, but obviously the shot moves, right? We talked about this at the beginning. So we're going to need to track this a little bit, right? So let's turn off that. And let's see if we can't track this shot here. So I'm going to go ahead and get my tracker now. It's obviously remembered that I was in the paint. There's my tracker. Okay. We gotta make sure we choose the right laptop one, right? So let's not get confused there. Okay, not that it really matters, but. Okay, I assume they're both, it's both the same motion, right, for that? So you could try either one, doesn't really matter. All right, let's try this one here. Okay, so it says motion sort laptop, well, we know that's right. Looks like it's the one on top, so let's just switch that over to the one on the bottom. Current track none, of course. Let's choose that. Okay, and what if we said track motion? Do we have a motion target here? No, we don't, because we don't have a track. Right? So what I might want to do here is just find one of those attach points like we did with the mountains earlier. Zoom in on that. And where's a good point here, you know? We want to look for an area of high contrast. I may choose this point right here. There's like a little darker area and the actual menu bar of this laptop. So we kind of put it in there and hopefully it sticks to that. Just kind of adjust this down a little bit. And leave this one here. Alright, so let's go ahead and hopefully this sticks. Let's go ahead and analyze forward. Okay, so far so good. Alright, it seemed to have tracked it. Alright, so now we can check, okay, edit target. We want to use it, we want to put the login page on there, right? We're not trying to do anything else that. So that's going to move ideally with the laptop, right? The login page. So that way when the camera moves, it moves too, right? Now, again, you could possibly fix that frame by frame in there, but you'd have to go in there and each one, you know, keyframe the anchor point or whatever, which would take a while, but you could do it by hand. But again, the whole point of After Effects is to save time with this. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that motion to the login here. Well, let's click OK. Right, and then we should be able to hit apply here. X and Y, just like we did before. Now we get a whole tracking feature here. So now if I turn on the said login, notice how it's kind of moving, right? Move my whole thing over. Okay, so that could be an issue, right? So again, we want to think about the timing of these things, right? So perhaps we want to do that first, because it's trying to attach that like way over here, right? So again, I could set the whole attach point here and then try to move that login to there, right? And again, that's just going to be for one frame, so that might not work out so well, right? So we probably need to do that beforehand, right? Before we do all this other stuff. Or we'd have to go through and one by one fix the attach point, right? And all that. So you notice how all those other layers, right, we're moving across. So that's something that we have to kind of be mindful of there. Right, so let's go ahead and Take that off for now, that tracker one. Immediately that thing moves, right? Okay, so let's try it on the actual rotor brush here, see what that does. So I'm gonna, just to not be confused, let's call this one laptop 2. We'll try to set that up. Motion source laptop 2. Okay, we'll be able to set that up. Notice though, when we try to do that one, it's already kind of used by the rotor brush, right? So that could be an issue. So that may not work out for us. Let's see if we go to laptop regular here, right? And then we go ahead and hit track motion. Okay, let's see. We'll go back laptop 2. Doesn't let me. Laptop 1. Okay, let's see. Now let's let track motion. Questions? Good. So we're just doing a combination of things here. Is everyone able to get the roto part done, at least? Okay, edit target, I'm gonna say, login, options, tracker 1. Okay, so far so good. Any questions about roto? Is everyone able to get it to work?
Yeah,
What
where's
do
the
we-
freeze button again?
Excuse me?
Where's the freeze button again on it?
The freeze button is right. Hold on, let me. Get back to the roto here. Now I'm in the middle of something else. It's right in the window here. You'll see it. It says freeze, right? So, just now I'm doing this. We'll go back to it in a second. Okay? But it's going to be on the lower right side of the layer window. It'll say freeze. Once you have all your frames basically scrutinized, you can go ahead and hit the freeze button. All right, let me just finish this real quick. Okay, so options, okay, we got that. It's a good track. Edit target. There's our new screen. And I should be able to hit apply here. Now, one of the issues that's happening here is maybe I should make a null object, because then I know I can float this thing, right? Because it's always trying to attach it to the anchor point, right? And in this case, for me to basically move this later after the fact, right? I have to go in and try to figure out, okay, where's the tracker here? How do I move this in position? Oops, there's the other hands. Oops. how do I move this in position here without it actually just moving one frame, right? So that's something we could let's do as well, right? So let's undo that. And let's go ahead and create that null, right? Anytime you're having an issue trying to attach something after the fact, and because it always tries to attach to that center anchor point, it's a good idea to use a null object. A little bit like we did with the wildebeest, right? So we leave that in. Okay, we'll go back here. And I'm gonna go back through here. And we'll start over on our tracker. The tracker is working well enough so as not to be an issue here. Okay, so we'll start, I'll track backwards for now. Right, so we're gonna hit track motion, edit target, now we're gonna use our null, right? Options are gonna be the same. We have to find that attach point that's suitable. And we're gonna say, this time we're at the end, so we'll say analyze backward.